Thank you. Good evening, this is Goldie. It's June 30th, 2010. Thanks for tuning in. Please, by the way, if you can, become a follower on Ustream of this show. We have storms here tonight, and I am in a secure location, Dick Cheney style, so sorry if we get cut off. Also, I posted an immigration rant from several weeks ago. If you could listen to those rants and please comment on them. Remember what it is that I'm doing on this rant. I'm trying to separate the message from what is actually being said, and then I want to dig way below the message, not using message words, to attempt to get at the root of the problem and possible solutions. I strongly urge all of you that watch Fox News and believe the messages that they say on Fox. And I'm going to ask all of you people to not say the phrase, Fox is fair and balanced. They aren't. And it kind of puts you at a disadvantage in discussions and arguments about policy. The main example that I'm going to point to is yesterday's questioning by Senator Sessions of Kagan for a Supreme Court justice. Fox was doing their normal morning program, and the second that Sessions started questioning her on a very specific item, Fox switched directly to the question regarding her policy on don't ask, don't tell when she was dean of the Harvard Law School. As soon as that question was asked several different times in different ways, Fox switched back to the prepared commentary that they had on how her views as the dean conflicted with the law. Fox left the hearings on, but they were silenced. And Patrick Leahy was doing some questioning. So they left that on part of the screen as they were talking about that whole thing. After Fox went through their criticism of Kagan's answer, they moved on to a hearing that was General Petraeus, and they never came back to the hearing. So be careful when you state that the message, at least when you say it to me, that they're fair and balanced. Just be careful of actually saying that. The fact that you keep saying it over and over again does not make it true. Here's another example, again, a message example. Huckabee was on Chris Wallace this past Sunday. He may or may not run for president. This speech or talk that he did was the absolute definition of Mr. Message. This is what he was saying. Republicans need to repent for their sins. They need to repent for their spending. TARP was wrong. Stimulus was wrong. By the way, of course, the statement that TARP was wrong is impossible to prove. What we're doing, this is also what he was saying, is what we're doing today, runaway deficits and competence, is un-American. It was all pure message. There was no substance. Pure message. All right. I'm kind of amazed that over the past week I've spoken with a large number of intelligent people who listened to a few of these rants. And we talked about the following items that I keep coming back to, potentially solving the structural problems we face today. Talking about potentially a constitutional amendment to get some term limits on there for congressmen and senators. Number two, an entity or corporation is not a person entitled to free speech rights, which was all of that Citizens United gobbledygook I've been talking about over the last 3 weeks. And only individual, this is just an idea, only individual humans can donate to political campaigns and drastically limit those donation amounts to low amounts to even the playing field. And no revolving door for employment, from government employment to any entity, union, corporation, affiliation, individual, or group that lobbies any governmental agency for 10 years. I'll come back to these items again a little bit later, but I've been kind of throwing those things out there, and I'm trying to hear where the defects are in those theories. I want to go ahead and beat the BP dead horse again for a little bit. The reason why I like the BP, it's such a good topic. Everyone has an opinion about it, and it allows us to discuss questions about the commons and regulation, structural deficiencies in both. And it allows us to look at all industries, not just the oil industry, but it's a great example of regulation, commons, etc., regarding all industries. And it's kind of like the 9/11 of commons disasters. And quickly, to redefine what that is, the commons is air, land, and water not owned by anyone in particular, but by everyone, and administered by the government. I previously stated that for the efficiencies of our free market system, I put that in quotation marks, and I use that term loosely, I've stated it is in the best interest of society for corporations and individuals to maximize their profits operating under a system of regulations of the commons. It's not up to BP to be good and add additional safety precautions out of some altruistic behavior. The failure of the Deepwater Horizon well, barring an illegal act by BP, is the failure of us to regulate correctly, and I mean us, the taxpayers, and to regulate correctly and efficiently due to the entrenched and beholden to contributor legislators, that's the representative senators as well as the president, and regulars that know they are going to get a job when they leave government service at the people that they regulate, BP and Exxon, as well as unlimited campaign contributions by corporations to political campaigns following the Citizens United case. I'm going to go ahead and read a New York Times article on BP's current efforts to drill a well in the Arctic to again illustrate the problem. This will take a little bit of time, but it's worth it. This is from June 23rd, 2010. It's from the New York Times. BP is pursuing Alaska drilling some call risky. I think it, again, shows all of the same problems that are not being dealt with. The future of BP's offshore oil operations in the Gulf of Mexico has been thrown into doubt by the recent drilling disaster and court wrangling over a moratorium. But about 3 miles off the coast of Alaska, BP is moving ahead with a controversial and potentially record-setting project to drill 2 miles under the sea and then 6 to 8 miles horizontally to reach what is believed to be a 100 million barrel reservoir of oil under federal waters. All other new projects in the Arctic have been halted by the Obama administration's moratorium on offshore drilling, including more traditional projects like Shell Oil's plans to drill 3 wells in the Chukchi Sea and 2 in the Beaufort. But BP's project, called Liberty, has been exempted as regulators have granted its status as an onshore project, even though it's about 3 miles off the coast in the Beaufort Sea. The reason? It sits on an artificial island, a 31-acre pile of gravel in about 22 feet of water, built by BP. The project has already received its state and federal environmental permits, but BP has yet to file its final application to federal regulators to begin drilling, which it expects to start in the fall. Some scientists and environmentalists say that other factors have helped keep the project moving forward. Rather than conducting their own independent analysis, federal regulators, in a break from usual practice, allowed BP in 2007 to write its own environmental review for the project, as well as its own consultation documents relating to the Endangered Species Act, according to 2 scientists from the Alaska Office of the Federal Mineral Management Service that oversees drilling. The environmental assessment was taken away from the agency's unit that typically handles such reviews and put in the hands of a different division that was more pro-drilling, said the scientists, who discussed the process because they remained opposed to how it was handled. The whole process for approving Liberty was bizarre, one of the federal scientists said. The scientists and other critics say they're worried about a replay of the disaster in the Gulf of Mexico because the Liberty project involves a method of drilling called extended reach that experts say is more prone to the types of gas kicks that triggered the explosion of Deepwater Horizon. They wrote their own regulations. They wrote their own review. This is the problem that we talked about over the last 3 weeks. The regulated having power over the regulators. It's really painful to read things like that because nobody has heard about this. Certainly not that you hear about on the news. It's in the New York Times, so certainly there's some, let's call them Democrats, not liberals, that read that. But this is a common occurrence. And I don't hear any outrage over it. I mean, where is that outrage by the public? It's because they don't see the oil spewing out every day. And similarly, where's the outrage over coal plants spewing crap, acid rain and asthma and cancer-causing chemicals and byproducts? You don't see them. That's why you don't hear about it. My point is, we must use a universally watched calamity to change the fundamental flaws in the system. And we don't have chances like this too often. And BP is one of those examples of a major calamity that everybody has an opinion on. So I'd like to use BP to come up with these 3 particular items. Again, the constitutional amendments that I think that we need to override Supreme Court and the legislature. I want term limits for legislators. As I said last week, I don't want, we all agree that the federal government up there is incompetent, and I would rather have incompetent newbies up there. So maybe two 2-year terms for the reps, maybe 1 6-year term for the senators. But I always want newbies up there. Incumbents doesn't work. The second thing is we need no revolving door for the regulators. And so that means that people that work for the Minerals Management Service are not going to go in and work for a long, long period of time for the people that they regulated and get that wink, wink, nod, nod. You're going to get a job if you issue me this permit in the Arctic. And number 3, overturning the Supreme Court's ruling that corporations and unions are people that deserve free speech rights and unlimited campaign contributions for advertising, indirectly. With individual humans, this is what I want to do, have individual humans allowed to donate to political campaigns and drastically limiting those donation amounts. I have not seen, and I'm going to try and go to a tea party on the 4th of July, and anybody else who's going to any of these things, I would suggest to go out there and see if anybody is calling for any structural fixes, not just that Obama's a Nazi or whatever those message words that you're hearing, or that government is bad and let's throw the bums out, because all you're going to do is put in new bums. Let's see if anybody is actually speaking of potential structural changes that might be able to work. Sending Tea Party candidates up there, by the way, without a plan, it's just going to become continued disaster. The incumbents, they'll become incumbents. And my question is, on these particular constitutional amendments, these are questions for you that I would like to see some emails on if it's possible. Are these particular term limits, no revolving door for regulators, and overturning that corporations are people, are these capital C conservative principles? Are these the kind of things that you would define as conservative principles? Or are they libertarian principles? Or what do you call them? Because when I have talked to people over the past week, there's some people that they go, you're a left-wing, liberal, whatever. I don't even know what those words mean. But my question is, what are those 3 particular constitutional amendments? How would you type them? You know, what would you call them? So please let me hear from you on that. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the message that comes out of both parties in Washington regarding those unlimited campaign contributions. And here's an example of a radio personality that is spewing pure message and no solutions following the Citizens United case. Congress has been working on limiting the damage of Citizens United by requiring disclosure in the ads that are paid for by entities, corporations, and unions. Many exceptions have crept into the bill, hence my call for a constitutional amendment. I know the NRA and U.S. Chamber of Commerce were very big on getting these exceptions in there. On June 25th, 2010, Neil Boortz, famous AM radio personality, he was on Fox, he stated specifically that the legislation passed by the House regarding campaign disclosure following Citizens United was a transparent gift to the Democratic Party in the exceptions for unions and the Sierra Club specifically. He didn't bring up NRA, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He said the phrase, you people that donate to Republicans or to Republican campaigns so are going to have to disclose yourselves, you people. So he was using the word, you people. That's what the Supreme Court has defined corporations and entities as for this right of free speech to donate unlimited amounts to campaign advertising. I don't know what he was doing there. I mean, well, I guess we're hearing pure message because he only brought up the things, the exceptions that were benefiting the Democrats. And as I said before, we're going to probably need a constitutional amendment for entities to not be construed as people. They have no inherent right to free speech under the original intent of the founders or modern-day construction of the Constitution. In fact, I don't see any need that corporations and entities may have for protection of their free speech rights in the form of unlimited indirect campaign contributions. Please tell me where I'm wrong. Why do they have a right to free speech? Why would they? Neil Boortz is failing his listeners by just turning this into a political message fight. and not a fight about the structural flaws inherent in the Citizens United case. All right, this past week, the Supreme Court decided a Second Amendment case, which it's the Chicago gun ban case, and I want to talk about it because it's pretty important. It's the Second Amendment. The amendments, first few amendments to the Constitution, I find are extremely important. And I'm going to go into this because the Supremes now consider it a fundamental right, the Second Amendment. Now, it's more convoluted of a case than that, and they sent it back to the lower court, but generally speaking, it has never been considered a fundamental right. Now, it seems over the years Republicans, and I won't say the message word conservatives, have supported the right to bear arms, let's just call it that generally, and have been the recipients of substantial contributions from the NRA. Democrats, and I won't say the message word liberals, have been for gun control generally, but also have been the recipients of substantial campaign contributions from the NRA. Now, I believe in the right to bear arms for several reasons. Number one, there are plenty of ways for your child to kill themselves in or out of the home that doesn't involve guns. Number two, how do you really argue against the right of someone to have a gun in the home for protection? I mean, seriously, how do you argue against somebody saying that? And number three, the Second Amendment, and most importantly, the Second Amendment is to me, and now the Supreme Court, a fundamental right that requires a higher standard for state restrictions upon such right. So I like the case because it helps me when I'm arguing the importance of certain fundamental rights that we have out there. I was actually glad to see that my opinion matches Sean Hannity's message. And Sean stated that he's got a gun on one of his panels and permits from several states to own and carry that gun. He's been trained in its use. He's been shooting since he was 11. He has a fingerprint lock on his gun safe. All really good things, it sounds like to me. Here's the main point. If Sean Hannity and others of his kind are able to message with a fundamental right, so the importance here is that he's really able to say this is a fundamental right. He's being a capital C conservative for a change. Then there may be other fundamental rights like the right to privacy or freedom of religion that could be argued and supported by the guns rights activists. So in other words, I now have something that I agree with Sean on, whether or not Sean's reason was because of NRA support or because he actually believes it. And let's go ahead and look at the right to have a gun in the home for a moment. In this time of declining governmental services, the City of Austin states that the current average response time is 6.5 minutes on a 911 call, 911 call. 6.5 minutes. The example is, you have a wife and kids at home, and the front door is kicked in by some robbers. 6.5 minutes won't do it. Look back at the argument that the founders wanted the right to bear arms solely for militias to overthrow a despot or dictatorial king. I understand that reasoning. And I understand why they wanted the right to bear arms and for militias. However, in those days, there were plenty of bad guys, marauding thieves, conspiring bandits, and riffraff of all kinds. Everyone had a gun to protect themselves. I understand that the British would enter a town, or at least generally, I understand the British would enter a town, dispossess owners from their homes, search the homes for guns and money, make the owners put all their weapons in a pile, and prohibit assemblies of people from taking place. All things in the first 4 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. But again, even though the British inspired the Bill of Rights, the fact is that back then we lived in dangerous times that required weapons for defense in your home. This does not and cannot discount the fact that in those days of no governmental services or protections, you needed to take some personal responsibility for your own life and protection. What makes anyone think that right now we don't live in a time of declining governmental services, police, fire, and EMS, that are going to continue to decline, and that we just can't afford everything that we want, or that we don't need a concept of personal responsibility? And you hear that concept of personal responsibility out of Republicans. You certainly hear it out of true libertarians. And it is a very, very important concept. Personal responsibility. I mean, if you're going to keep a gun in your home, it's up to you to either teach your kids how to use it, put a lock on it, separate the ammo from the guns, which makes it kind of useless to use. I agree with that argument. But you've got to use some personal responsibility. The government can't do everything for you. Gun control people are attempting to do something for you and assume that you cannot take personal responsibility for your actions. Now, the Supreme Court did not say in its opinion that reasonable restrictions, permits, training requirements, etc., are unconstitutional. I admit, also, there's a different feeling when you live in Manhattan in a high-rise and you know everybody's got a gun all around you, at every wall. All the neighbors have them. Versus living, say, in the suburbs or exurbs of Austin, where the response time might be over 10 minutes or so. I'm not trying to argue whether this thing is right or wrong. I'm just trying to say that in the case when we've gotten a good Supreme Court opinion that defines a fundamental right, we want to use that definition of fundamental right for other fundamental rights that can't be infringed upon with reasonable restriction. So for Manhattan, the reasonable restrictions you may need to take a training class once a month on how to put a lock on. And in Austin, it might be that you need to take a training class every 6 months. I don't know. Also, think about this. What makes anyone believe that a ban on guns, Chicago ban, would keep weapons out of the hands of criminals? It's the same thing with the drug war. I mean, does the ban on drugs or the 1930s ban on alcohol keep any of those substances, or did it keep any of the substances out of the hands of the people that want to get them? All it's going to do is keep legitimate people from buying the guns. I know it sounds like I'm a gun advocate. I'm not. I'm a Second Amendment advocate. In any event, in order to be true to the importance of the fundamental rights of the Bill of Rights, I have to support the Supreme Court's recent decision. And I believe it helps me, and hopefully it helps you in any of your other arguments that you're making about these other fundamental rights that we don't want infringed upon. All right, last week I talked a little bit about the beginnings of insurance and what it means and what it is. And I did it in the example of car insurance, since car insurance is something you have to have in order to drive a car. And we talked about some of the disincentives to actually pay claims and how over time the thought of what insurance is and why it is and how it's supposed to work has evolved into a system of disincentives. So going from car insurance to healthcare, I just want to talk about some questions, because these are really going to be questions about what a pre-existing condition is, how we allocate risk, who pays what premiums, what types of bonuses may occur. The current system. Let's say you're under 55 and you're not too poor for Medicaid. Our current system allows healthcare providers to set up their own system of what is or is not a pre-existing condition. There are only a few providers allowed into Texas. They all lobby. They all contribute to the campaigns of legislators. And I believe they get to write the rules and the regulations, exactly as BP does. That's why the importance of talking about BP becomes apparent, because all of the times that there is something that people have to have, so we may or may not define it as a commons, but if there is something like that, and we limit the number of companies that are going to offer it, but we don't regulate those companies, disaster. Now, there may be a waiting period for pre-existing conditions. It was 18 months for Blue Cross Blue Shield for individuals when I checked. It was about 10 years ago. or for large companies. In other words, if you start to work for a large company, you're going to have an 18-month period prior to which you're actually covered. For those large companies, however, because they're competing to get people, there may be no waiting period and no exclusions. It's possible. Now just think about it. If you lie about a pre-existing condition, and remember that statute, HIPAA, that you always sign when you go in there, the insurance company will have access to all of your prior confidential disclosures to doctors and healthcare providers, as well as all drugs that you've ever purchased and used insurance for. So if you go into the doctor under a plan that you just sign up for, I'm talking about, again, our current system, they may not check these pre-existing conditions immediately. They'll let you fill out the application. And then 5-10 years down the road, you put in a claim for skin cancer, and they go back and they find out that you had a spot removed that was suspicious 10, 20, 30 years ago. That could be construed individually by those companies as a pre-existing condition. Now, when you hear the survey questions, that there's about 55% of the population want Obamacare overturned, they don't differentiate when they do those particular survey questions. So obviously, be careful whenever you hear a simple survey question. They don't differentiate between people who've never had an item that may be chronic or never had a spot removed and other people who think they are healthy and covered. Now, when you think about it, if you've ever asked any of your friends when Obamacare was up there, and I'm using the message word Obamacare just as an easy definitional term, everybody who was healthy likes their health care the way it is. And those that were not healthy or have had a claim denied did not like how it was. I mean, how many people have actually read their policy each year and each amendment and endorsement that comes back from the insurance company? And how many people actually plugged in a condition like a heart transplant or a lung transplant, for example? I'll bet that the people that like their health care plans do not have a condition that requires them to stay in their current job. Because if they change, they may not be covered. So most people think, I'm all good, I'm healthy. But if you change jobs, you may not be covered. You may have had a condition come up during that time. Now let's go back to that definition of what insurance was for a moment. In the old days of a small village, when a house burned down, everyone chipped in and helped rebuild. They all got together, sense of community. People then realized it would be easier to chip into a fund to rebuild than helping to rebuild, and if they had enough money to do it. And then they got a company to administer the funds, an insurance company. People started regulating the construction industry to limit the losses from that fund. For example, they started making people put in sprinklers or not have indoor fires and put in firewalls. However, once it became a profit-making enterprise, everything changed, in that the incentive changed to the company to not pay claims. That was not the initial purpose of everybody chipping in and rebuilding the house. We were trying to help our community from catastrophic losses. The company's incentive is to make as much of a profit as possible. So if we can agree that we want some regulation of the healthcare industry, which we do have some regulation, as inefficient as it is now with the donations from these companies to the legislators, we have the same problem of the regulated, so the regulated companies writing the regulations, at least in Texas. Maybe you other states have better ways, but in Texas, the companies write the regs. And this is the exact same BP regulatory problem. The exact same thing. These guys wink, wink, nod, nod, and they know they're going to get a job out there. The governor appoints the regulators. The governor's beholden to companies. So, same exact problem. That's why the BP example is a really good example of why we need structural change regarding regulations, campaign contributions, and the revolving door. Now here's a question for you, because we're not going to go too deeply into healthcare, but here's the question. How much privacy are we willing to give up to determine the risk factor of pre-existing conditions? So in the current system, Governor Rick Perry's blood draw database, which happened for a 2-year period of time, every baby that was born in Texas had a drop of blood taken from it and put into a database. And now, I don't know what it was used for. I just know that that drop of blood was taken. It was admitted. It's in the Texas Observer. It could have been used to identify risk factors that are pre-existing conditions from birth. They might be pre-existing conditions for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or cancer or diabetes or blood diseases or a host of other ailments that can be determined at birth from that blood. So to me, that is the most ultimate intrusion if it were to be used for that. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying that it could be. And it gets us into this question of looking at what pre-existing conditions do we look at? Because companies right now look at whatever pre-existing conditions they want to. If you saw the movie Sicko, Michael Moore had taken a couple of companies and they had a laundry list of pre-existing conditions that would not be covered, no matter what premiums or how long you've been there, etc. In addition to that, so we're looking at how much privacy are we willing to give up in order to look at pre-existing conditions. So we're looking at the current system, which may end up being what we have, or the new system, okay, which may end up being some form of universal health care. And so in addition to this pre-existing condition question, are we going to look at everyone's behaviors? Are we going to look at everybody's blood? Are we going to look at everybody's family history? What'd your mother die of? What'd your father die of? Are we going to look at all of these things to determine what their premium should be? Because the likelihood that you may have heart disease because your parents had it, should that person pay more money? I actually don't know the answer to this question. I'm just investigating it. Because the point was, when you got everybody together to avoid the catastrophic loss of one house burning down, it turned out that the people that smoked cigarettes in bed, or had indoor fires, were more likely to have a claim against the fund, or to have everybody chip in. So does this mean that obese people, or people that have pre-existing conditions, or familial history that may show that they have a higher likelihood of having a big claim? And I mean, are there behaviors? Cigarette smoking, drugs, alcohol, driving without a seatbelt, driving without a helmet? All of these things are different risks. And it's a very difficult question to figure out, when do we make these other risks pay more money? I certainly don't want to be in a pool with a bunch of motorcycle riders that don't wear helmets. And in Texas, you're not required to wear a helmet. You know, in life insurance, they ask you whether or not you smoke cigarettes. So there is some differentiation of people and their risks in some types of insurance today. So that's the existing situation, and a couple of questions for us to think about as we're trying to come up with a theoretical, good, working healthcare system. So let's move on to a theoretical discussion where we need to get away from inflammatory words like Obamacare or socialized medicine or universal health care. We need to begin with the assumption that we've secured the border, okay? I had a buddy of mine today say it's impossible, can't be done. And we've given everyone a legitimate and taxpayer-efficient path to citizenship. So we're going to take care of the immigration problem as an assumption for our discussion about healthcare, about a theoretical healthcare system. We need to be able to get our arms around the total population problem that will benefit from this healthcare plan. We also need to assume that we want everyone to have health care. That's certainly not the line that you hear. People, as I've said before, people that have good health care and no health problems and don't need to change their jobs think we have good health care. People that have had a pre-existing condition deny a claim, try to change companies when they had skin cancer, realize that we do want everybody to have health care because otherwise they're not going to be able to get it under the current system. And let me give you an example of where almost everyone agrees that there should be health care for everyone in this country, legal or illegal. And this is Democrats and Republicans alike. And this would be a survey question that you do with other people around. A person has their leg cut off in an accident that occurs right outside the emergency room of a large private hospital. And that person's artery, their leg artery, is spewing blood, okay? The patient does not have insurance. They have a minute and a half to live. The survey question is, do you believe that they should receive emergency care to stem the blood flow, or do you believe that we should allow them to die? That's the survey question. Now the answer is, I'm going to be Mr. Anecdotal here for a minute and say everybody wants a tourniquet put on that leg. I think it's a great survey question because the way I phrased it, it's almost impossible for you to legitimately say, no, let them die. I mean, you could say it, but your friends and family and anybody else who's walking by is going to look at you funny. Okay, so for the assumptions, we're gonna assume that we do want health care for everyone. So we've got our arms around the immigration problem. We know there's a total number of people that are going to be served by the health care system. And then we need to assume that the health care pie is a limited commons, which it is. So when you hear the message that there's not going to be health care rationing, we know that's obviously untrue because there currently is rationing. You have plans that are not covered. They don't cover a heart transplant. We also assume that while it's a limited commons, we have to assume that it's going to be run by an efficient government. Now that is a tough assumption. But in any event, my main idea is how do we reward good behavior or penalize bad behavior? I think that probably the easier way is going to be that we give bonuses for the good behavior. However, in order to give those bonuses for good behavior, we're going to have to give up some medical privacy, kind of like getting a good driver discount, okay? So, for example, the risk factors of weight, alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, and diet. Those would be some major risk factors that we would like to reward people for. And if you think about that, if we had a system of bonuses, where you would get an annual checkup, and if you were within a certain weight category, then your premium would be that much less. Only the healthy would apply for the bonuses. So if you knew you could pass it, you would be the ones to apply for it. I had talked about the article out of the American Statesman dated June 25, 2010. And this showed that people were being paid bonuses to take their pills. And it was saving the insurance company a ton of money. At first, when I saw that article, I was really, really not happy. I was upset with that article because I was wondering about where is personal responsibility? Where has personal responsibility gone? Because when I'm prescribed a drug, I take it. It says take them all 3 times a day. I'd set an alarm on my clock so that I would make sure I would take it. But when I saw that their statistics are showing that when they can get people to take the blood thinning medicine, that it defers a $10,000 emergency room visit, I had second thoughts about it. As painful as it is. And then I realized that a bonus system may be the only way under a future universal healthcare system that may come about. Even though we've passed the law, it may or may not come about. It may be the only way of rewarding good behavior, of keeping your weight under control, not drinking, not smoking cigarettes, not doing drugs, etc. But I do want everybody to always think about how much privacy you're willing to give up to get these bonuses. So there might be some big database that your breathalyzer, so when you blow into a breathalyzer every 3 days to determine whether or not you've been drinking, you've now given up some portion of privacy. And if you've watched my surveillance rant, once that stuff goes on the database, it's there. It's there forever, can't be protected. But we're trying to come up with a system of rewarding good behavior and making the commons cost. Remember, the 2 questions last week were, what is the commons? And then how do we most efficiently administer the commons and repair the commons? And if the commons is the healthcare pie, how do we dole out the healthcare pie? We have to figure out a way of making it more efficient. And in order to do it, we had to do all of those assumptions. And I apologize for all those assumptions that may or may not ever be realistic. But that's the only way that we can actually discuss this issue. We have to assume we've gotten our arms around the entire population that's going to benefit from it, and that we all want everybody to have health care. And then how do we make it efficient? At least how do we reward the good behavior? People that walk every day, people that work out, people that don't eat after 8 o'clock, people that don't eat ice cream, people that eat salads, people that don't eat bacon, whatever. How do we do it? And I really, really would like to hear your comments. You can call me or email me with your comments. And by the way, tell me what I'm missing under my definition of what the current system is on pre-existing conditions. All we do currently is come up with a very limited system of what the pre-existing conditions are. But left unchecked, anything could be a pre-existing condition from that first drop of blood on. I live in Austin, so I'm going to have more pollution spew from Houston, which comes up every day because we have a breeze that runs it up that direction. We get it every day. Should I pay a higher premium? The insurance companies would love me to do that right now. Okay, I want to go back for one quick message clarification on some remarks that I made last week. And this was on the famous BP $20 billion slush fund as it was defined by Rush Limbaugh and Joe Barton. And I stated that I believe that Joe Barton and Rush Limbaugh were shills for the Republican Party. Well, Joe Barton, of course, he's in the Republican Party, so that doesn't even mean anything. I only suspect that Rush is a shill for the Republican Party, since almost everything that he says is anti-Obama, Obamacare, an anti-Democrat party. He doesn't say Democratic Party. He says a specific message word, Democrat Party. And both of these things are message words. They're completely devoid of meaning. They're intended to incite. They don't mean anything. So when you hear those out of somebody, more likely than not, they are for or against one of the two parties. They're certainly not trying to get to any structural deficiencies that might be able to be fixed. Here's another one. I mean, Karl Rove is a regular contributor on Fox. He now uses the phrase Democrat Party. He uses that, Democrat Party. It's Democratic Party. It's an insult. It's like saying evil BP. It doesn't mean anything. It's a message word. Don't use them. Hannity currently uses the phrase the anointed one to describe Obama. But he always follows it up with, I have respect for the office. I'm not going to say he's shilling for the Republican Party, but it's sure, when you use the anointed one, you're saying that he considers himself God. Obama considers himself God, or the sovereign, the king. Today, by the way, Obama was on CNN, he was doing a speech, and he proved himself, as what I've said in some past rants, as more of the same. Just a slightly different George Bush. And sorry, but I do believe that. It's only modest incremental differences between him and George Bush. Different recipients of stimulus money versus Halliburton. It's going to unemployment funds. And I call that more of the same. And Obama was complaining about Joe Barton's apology to BP. Pure message. Absolutely pure election message. To say that Republicans are with evil BP and we Democrats are against evil BP. That's pure message, just as bad. So I want to go ahead and, again, Hopefully that is a good, again, introduction to healthcare, a little discussion of the Second Amendment, and a continuing problem with BP drilling in the Arctic writing their own environmental review. They wrote their own environmental review. They created an island to avoid offshore drilling regulations by having it be on land in 22 feet of water, 32-acre gravel island. That's what our regulations allow. Our regulations allow that. Now, whose fault is that? BP's? No, it's ours. It's ours. And it's our responsibility to overturn those types of things. The only way is usually through constitutional amendments. I've been told that's impossible to do. But until somebody tells me that it's absolutely impossible, I'm not going to stop calling for it. I want to go ahead and thank our sponsors, all of which they continue to disagree with one or more of my stands. But they obviously want this type of discussion to continue, even though it's a one-sided discussion. So keep sending me the emails. We make it two-sided. PianoByAngelo.com. That's Angelo Limbesis, who teaches and plays keyboards and appears Friday and Saturday nights and Sunday brunch at Russell's on Kirby Lane in Austin. ZetaDesign.com for all of your decorative painting and faux painting needs. She can make anything look like anything, I promise you. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your plumbing needs. Believe me, I've used him for 20 years. And TicoAdventureLodge.com, that's Tico AdventureLodge.com, a small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica, near an excellent surf beach. And of course, Amhar Tequila. And you can get more information on that tequila at santospirits.com. That's SANTO spirits.com. An extremely smooth tequila. Thank you and God bless. Please tune in next week for more of Goldie's rant. That scared the crap out of me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Daisy.